We are on video number 8, the read and commentary on the origin of the world. What we're getting ready to read and understand may be difficult for some that are listening to accept, and that is perfectly okay, as each of us must come to gnosis about this sacred knowledge in our own time. Last video we talked about 3 atoms. First atom of light, that is spiritual in nature, that appeared on the first day. And this is the atom Pagaris, which is atom after the spiritual nature, or the pneumatic nature. Atom not meaning a single person, but rather that being that is rebellious in nature, meaning adamantine, having a willful, strong, powerful being that cannot be deterred from its willful path. And this is the will of God within all of us. And this is what we're to ultimately listen to, what we call our name, or Philip calls our accomplishment. This is the first atom, that spiritual nature, that small voice that's always speaking within you for you to find your true self, despite all the naysayers, despite all the obstacles, despite everyone else and the world's definition of what truth is. You adhere to that intuition, that instinct, those dreams, those passions, the thing that moves you, that motivates you, that the world will tell you that is not reality, that is false, that is a lie, that is evil or a sin. Despite all of that, you still follow this truth because it is the light that sustains you. It is the reason you're here. It is the message within you that is guiding you to unfold and blossom forth the Son of God within, which is the power within you, the very reason you're here, your mission, your purpose, your gift to humanity, and a face of God. That's the first atom that is within all of us. That's what we call the tree of life. Now, in order for us to understand this tree of life, we must partake of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Not just good. And in this case, when we're referring to good, we're referring to the nature of spiritual things, the nature of the will that we have to set forth. We must also partake of evil, which is the feminine, which is this realm. In other words, we must accept it with grace and understand that our nature is perfect, and the mistakes that we make is not because of who we are, but because of the state that we're in. Not because of the state of who we are, but of the state that we're in. We are in a realm called the Kanoma, and this realm is imperfect. It is corrupt. And our lack of gnosis, and we're on a continuum. It's not as though you have gnosis or you don't have gnosis. Actually, gnosis resides in everyone. It's dormant in some and more awakened in others. And it's on a continuum. And it varies in each one of our lives, even, where we may come in and out, wax and wane out of gnosis. We will have moments of experiencing Gnostic moment. The point here is that the truth is you are a son and daughter of God. God created you just the way you were intended to be. You are perfect, and the only thing that you have to do is to realize that, and that's the moment of gnosis. Now then, you may say, Thomas, but I make mistakes, and I do all kinds of things that hurt people, sometimes unintentionally, and sometimes even intentionally. So how can you say I'm perfect? You see, that is part of your perfection, those mistakes, those errors. What is called sin in Orthodox Christianity is not actually the true definition of the word sin. Sin means to miss the mark of understanding what your true nature is. That is what sin is. Sin is not realizing that you are son and daughter of God. God loves you just the way you are, created you, intended to be just the way you are, with all of your quote-unquote flaws. I'll give you an example to help you drive that home. If you see a newborn baby that is attempting to learn to walk and it falls down, do you call that child evil or bad or imperfect? You do not. The child is still perfectly that child, just the way it is. What Orthodox Christianity has done, it has taken the word mistake and sin and made these into the same word. When in the Bible and in Gnostic texts, if you read and understand what's being truly said by Christ, he's telling you that sin means to miss the mark of understanding your worthiness to receive the good news, that you are a son and daughter of God, and Christ is within you, and you must follow that true voice that is within you, seated in you by God himself and herself. Intended from the beginning, you are on a mission. And for you not to accomplish that, and not to find and understand that worthiness to receive, knock and you shall receive, is to miss the mark. That is the sin. That is why it's the only thing that is unforgivable. Because if you are not true to yourself, you will literally live in hell. And your spirit will not be satisfied and it will continually reincarnate to find yourself. Now that is the first atom. Now what is going to help you find that truth is the second atom, the soul-oriented atom. This is your radar system, and God has gifted you with a soul. The soul is another way of saying astro. So actually, and the word astro mean the same thing in different languages, but essentially they come from the word star, or of star stuff. We are made of stars, so the universal intelligence that we are made of is within us. That is the Christ. That is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And the evil being, that part that is disfiguring, that part that is less than, the part that is emptied out, the part that is desecrated, so that we may experience emptiness. You know, as Christ said, empty the old wine sacks so that the new may enter. We must experience exquisite emptiness, exquisite abandonment, exquisite silence in order for us to receive the will of God that is within us. This is the way it works. So this thing called the soul is the gift that has been given to you so that you may have a radar system to find your true self, your spirit. And that soul, which is made up of the fates, or what's called the configurations or the ages, is your astrological will. That is your chart, your course, that is going to help you. Now, you're not fated to that will. However, what you are fated to is your unique accomplishments and gifts. Now, before you think that that's a bad thing to be fated, understand that we all come with different things. For example, when you see a deer, it's a deer. If you see a lion, it's a lion. If you see a human, it may have blue eyes or it may have brown eyes. Neither of these are intrinsically better or worse than the other. They have their natures. But its expression as a deer, or its expression to come with blue eyes or brown eyes, that is your soul. But it is corresponding to a higher emanation or expression in the spiritual realm that is called your spirit. The blood is what coagulates and forms in the material realm your manifestation in the flesh realm. That is why life is carried in the blood, and the blood is the soul. It is the waters of life that is running through your veins. You must partake of that essence, you see. That's the second atom. The number 6 is man. And so some of the ways you can tap into the soul are all those messages out there that are guiding you. It's not paranoia. Paranoia are divine interventions that you may get through divination. The very blueprint, or imprint rather, of the spiritual correspondences in this realm, in all of life, that is telling you the secrets of the universe. That is paranoia in action. The soul speaks to you in a different way. It speaks to you by a sentiment, an internal knowing, through instinct, through emotions, through dreams. And these can be had through various means. And I know many of you on this channel appreciate things like meditation. Others believe in prayer, and others of you believe in the DMT. Others have encouraged me to look into or talk about astral projection. You see, none of those are right completely, nor are they wrong completely, because everybody has their own way in which they can tap into their radar system. And if it's right for you, it's right for you. You see, again, that's why I always say, go back to, do not misconstrue the message with the messenger. The messenger is the vehicle. And if some of you want to use meditation or yoga, and others of you find that not right for you, and you only want to adhere to a more strict diet, such as prayer or whatever's in the text of the Bible or the Gnostic writings, then that's perfectly fine and right for you. You see, that's the way it works. Truth comes through many different means. Now that's the soul. And then finally, the third atom is earthly, that is a man of law. Now he is the one or she that adheres to man-made spiritual laws. Now we're not talking about governmental laws. What we're referring to is man who makes up spiritual laws, saying that these are the laws of God that you must adhere to or else you'll go to hell. Now this is the earthly atom. He must have a religion. He looks up to authority figures, strong figures. Usually these are nations that are ruled by despotic or tyrannical or authoritative figures, fascist figures. And we see this today in the current world that we're living in, where more and more people are attempting to go back to this way of thinking, monarchy and strong figures and fascist figures. And this seems to be a way to rebel against the globalist agenda. Well, the nationalist agenda or the globalist agenda is inconsequential to finding truth, you see. They're just two sides of the same coin, really, ultimately. They're mechanizations of the Demiurge, really, ultimately. But I'm not going to go into that in this video. Important for us to understand these three types. Not only to understand these three types, but understand they were created in different days. The spiritual being on the first day, the second atom, the soul-oriented atom, on the 6th day, and then finally, on the 8th day, the flesh atom. In our last video, we discovered the 8th day of creation is the creation of the flesh atom, the man of law, in Genesis chapter 2. by the Demiurge, who calls himself Jehovah Lord God. When we talk about day, we're not referring to 24-hour period. In the Bible, when we talk about days, we're referring to an expression that is completed. For God, day is as 1,000 years. 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8. But beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. Now, is Peter saying here that a day for God is literally 1,000 years? No, he's just telling you that a day is whatever consummates or brings to fullness a will of God or an emanation of God. That's really what it is. So a day refers to one emanation or one willful purpose that's being completed, or one expression. That's a day. It's important for us to understand this. Otherwise, if we're going to read the Bible literally, we may think that God created everything in 6 days, and then we're not going to be able to understand the rest of the Bible, nor Gnostic text. So we talked about the 2 trees, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of life. And this will take us into our next section, which have you eaten from the tree? And this becomes really important to understand what is it the Demiurge and his minions are trying to prevent us from access to. And that's the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. But what is that thing called the tree of life? So for this, we must look at some scriptures, both biblical and Gnostic. So I'm first going to take you to Genesis chapter 3, verse 22. And Lord God said, Behold, the man become as one of us, to know good and evil. And now at least he put forth his hand, and take also of the tree of life, and eat, and live forever. Therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from whence he was taken. So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubims, and a flaming sword which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life. This thing called the tree of life is part of what made man at the level of even Lord God himself, or the Demiurge, Yaldabaoth, Jehovah, so that he may know good and evil. But what is this thing called good and evil, and why should we know about it? And why is it so important that it be sealed off so that we may not partake of it? And not just that, but not partake of the tree of life. This God called Jehovah, the Demiurge, is a jealous God. As it says in Exodus 34, verse 14, For thou shalt worship no other God. For the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. So what is he jealous about? What is it that he is threatened by? What is this thing called jealousy? So envy and jealousy, taking this from Etymology Online, Old French envy, jealousy, rivalry, envious, having hatred or ill will. To envy, hate. Jealousy is the malign feeling which is often had toward a rival, or possible rival, for the possession of that which we greatly desire, as in love or ambition. Envy is similar feeling toward one, rather rival or not, who already possesses that which we greatly desire. So envy is when you are looking on with covetedness, something you desire that someone else may have. And jealousy is the enmity prompted by fear. Envy is enmity prompted by covetedness. So there's the difference. Jealousy is by fear, and envy is by covetedness. And we know that the name of this God called Jehovah is jealousy. So he is fearful. He is afraid. So this is what motivates him to prevent us from having access to the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life, because he is envious and jealous. He is afraid, he is covetous. Now, for us to really understand what is this thing called tree of knowledge of good and evil, we have to understand what does the word evil mean. And I'm taking this again from Etymology Online. The adverb is Old English yefil, originally of words or speech. Also as a noun in Old English, what is bad, sin, wickedness, anything that causes injury morally or physically. Disease, malady, and ultimately we could say death. So we must partake of this world and accept it for what it is, which is the womb of death and the womb of injury. So when you're doing evil, what you're doing is you're trying to inflict injury on someone. That's what evil is. And you're trying to do this in a way in which you can separate within the person their moral fiber and their physical fiber. And the way you do this is by creating a fracture within that person. You create an enmity within the person, or hate of self, or damaging of self, whether it be physical, emotional, or spiritual damage. Your ultimate goal here is to damage them or weaken them. That is evil. Now, why would we need to partake of evil then? It's not that we partake of evil, but rather we have the knowledge of how that process works. It's not the tree of good and evil. The actual tree of good and evil was created by the Demiurge. He's the god of good and evil, you see. The god of the tree of life and the god of the knowledge of good and evil is not the Demiurge, for they're in the midst of the garden before Demiurge even arrived. That God is the monad, the true God, the true Father-Mother. It's not that we must partake in injury or moral depravity or emotional abuse, so forth and so on, but that we be knowledgeable of the tactics and tools and strategies of the Demiurge. You see, that's the knowledge of that process the Demiurge wants to prevent us from having access to. So this is what is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Understanding what brings life and what brings injury. Now, so long as we're kept in the dark about that, then we will have depletion, degradation, destruction, and death. How does the Demiurge prevent us from having access to this tree of knowledge of good and evil? Well, spiritually, the correspondence to good and evil, or the understanding of good and evil, is to understand the will of God, the formative mind of God, which is also called the shaping, or the feminine, the womb, the vessel, which is, in other words, understanding the male and the female. So how do you prevent access to that tree is by severing the male and the female. So this world will go about to create a model of what a man's supposed to be like, concepts of what is true, those constructs of reality. So you do not have access to your full self. Of course, in Genesis it talks about the husband clinging to his wife, and that's not healthy. To cling to something is not healthy, right? So this brings us to understanding the difference between what is true is not always what is truth. True of a statement conforming to the actual state of reality or fact, factually correct. And we got a lot going on today about this thing called fake news. And everybody has a different reality about what is this thing called what is true and what is fake. This is what true is. True is merely our understanding of what is factual and our understanding of what is reality. What was true many years ago is not necessarily what's true today. It doesn't talk about whether this is subjective or objective. It just merely is an adjective to describe a condition or a state of something as being a fact or real. And reality here can be easily manipulated and created to suit one's confirmation bias. This is where we get that, again, this understanding of today in particular. They're wanting to warp us back into, so we have a different understanding of what reality is, and we can no longer truly understand what truth is. So truth is the state of quality of being true to someone or something. Faithfulness or fidelity. So what are we truly being faithful to, having fidelity to? We're being faithful to ourselves, the Christ within. This is why Sophia on the highest level spiritually is called Pistis Sophia, also known as wisdom faith. When we're true to our inner voice, our real true self, that's the truth. And we listen to our spiritual selves, then we're able to tap into that truth. Now listen to what the outside world is telling you, whether it be Fox News or it be MSNBC. Neither one of these have a handle on what truth really is. They only have retellings of what they deem to be reality or the facts, which is called true. It's not the truth. The truth only resides within you, and only you can know what is right for you. But part of Gnosticism is for you to begin the walk of revealing that truth within you. And the Gnostic text and many of the wisdoms of old, including the Bible, Christ being at the top of that list, is there to help you tap into that truth so that you're no longer guided left or right, but you're walking the straight and narrow path that Christ talked about. So in order to arrive at this, we must have access to the knowledge of good and evil. You're heterosexual, you're homosexual, you're transgender, you're male, you're female. None of those matter to the monad. In fact, you were created just the way you are, and you must find your truth. Don't allow what's on the outside to convince you to be transgendered or not to be transgendered. To be one or the other is not dependent upon what are the trends or what does news say, or whether the Bible says this or the Bible doesn't say that. See, none of those ultimately matter to God. You must find within you the truth. Don't be persuaded one way or the other to be transgendered or not to be transgendered. But when we're talking about the male and female, we're not talking about transgenderism or intersex. We're talking about a spiritual understanding, about we having the power within ourselves to will and form what it is we are moved to create, to bring forth that accomplishment that's residing in us, the seed that God germinated in us, planted in us from the beginning, to express our name. Chapter 1, verse 27 of Genesis says, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he, meaning God, in the image of God created he him. You see, all creatures were created from the beginning to be male. Now, that doesn't mean male isn't having genitalia that are male in structure, but rather it means spiritually having the power to set forth our will, to be the founder of our will, the Father. And that's what Thomas says, means when he says paradise will be found when the female becomes as the male. When the female is finally to be free to manifest its will, rather than being subjugated to the male freely, then it becomes male. But God didn't just create man to be male, but he created man to be a him, male and female. The female part being the part that has the understanding of the knowledge of darkness, the destructive force, you see. But we want to be able to use that destructive force in a way that helps us to form our will. You see, as I always say on this channel, will without form is hapless and going all over the place, and it's destructive. The female shape is the womb that helps to bring the will into the loving embrace of manifestation. And so the man must festate, the him, must fester or germinate, put the seed into the ground and let it fester, let it grow. This is manifesting in the female nature, which is the womb. This is all spiritual, on a spiritual level. And so what does the Demiurge want to do? Well, he comes along in chapter 2 to divide the male and the female. And this is what Christ means when he says, let no one put asunder what God has put together, has brought together. The male and the female were meant to be brought together. And so when we're in this realm, the male and the female, again, is not about talking about the soul beings that are in each human being. Every one of us are a him, meaning a will, having a will to set forth, to manifest, being brought to motion and repose. Having the understanding of female, or that part of us that knows how to shape that will, and to tame it, and to form it, as though we were to form a piece of clay, is what is ultimately being kept from us. And so we separate that two parts of ourselves, the male and the female. Women are only supposed to behave this way, man is only supposed to behave that way, and therefore man is unable to tap into his feminine nature, and woman is unable to tap into her masculine nature. We're referring to anyone, whether you be gay or straight, whether you be intersex, whether you be asexual, whether you be bisexual. None of that matters. And this is extremely important because we're at a time where the Demiurge wants to unleash the forces to take us back into the Dark Ages so that man and woman cannot understand their true selves again. And we tap back into quote-unquote man-made spiritual laws, put Bible back into society, forcing laws, doing away with the separation of church and state, you see. This is the powers that be right now. Authoritative fascist leaders that wanting to rise up because they know that the end of the age is here and humanity is on the precipice of ascending and growing into the next age, into our next level. And how does the Demiurge do this? He uses many tools. One of them is threat, and another one is shame. The feeling of guilt or disgrace, confusion. And who is the God of confusion? The Old Testament God. What does that Old Testament God do at the Tower of Babel? Well, he confuses everyone's language. This is what Christ means when he says, you're the God of confusion. From the beginning, you were a murderer. And he calls by shame, disgrace, dishonor, insult, loss of esteem or reputation, shameful circumstance. What brings disgrace? So what is that word called disgrace? Well, it's the opposite of grace. And who is the one who brought us grace? Well, Christ. The Demiurge uses disgrace or shaming as a way to prevent us from tapping into our worthiness to receive the good news, the gospel that Christ brought us, which is the gospel of grace, the gospel to free us and to bring us the abundancy of all the powers that reside within us, the spiritual nature, the Christ within, the hope of glory, the power to create and emanate, to do miracles even greater than Christ himself. As he says, why do you marvel? Do you not know that you can do these and even greater? And it says here in John 1, verse 14, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. John bare witness of him and cried, saying, this was he of whom I spake. He that cometh after me is preferred before me, for he was before me, and of his fullness have all we received, and grace for grace. You see, the Demiurge goes about to create shame and disgrace. For the law was given by Moses, which is disgrace and shame. But grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one hath seen God at any time, including Moses. This is what's being said here. The only begotten Son, which is the bosom of the Father, he hath declared him. Only the Christ has seen the the true Father. At this time, 2,000 years ago, Christ was the only one that could understand and see the true nature of God, which is a loving God filled with grace, creating us just the way we were intended to be from the beginning. Now, another way that the Demiurge goes about to prevent us from having access to our inner voice is through fear. I'm taking this from the Secret Book of John, verse 17, and it says here, the passions come into being from these 4 demons, and one of those demons is Blaomen, is the one who belongs to fear. The mother of them all is Isthmus Ouch Eptito. The passions come into being from these 4 demons, and one of those demons, fear. From fear comes panic, flattery, anguish, and shame. Now, another way in which the Demiurge goes about and entraps us into this realm and prevents us from our higher self is through forms, creating likenesses, by creating laws that prevent us from being ourselves. Now, I'm not talking about man-made laws. I'm talking about man creating quote-unquote spiritual laws they think were handed down to them by God, so they may rule over mankind. And so what do? They create a legal agreement, terms of agreement, later a legal document, and what we call forms. Here, fill out this form. You see, a systematic or orderly arrangement, putting people into classes, a class or rank, a fixed course of study. These are forms, formations. Line up, get into formation. See, the military. Classes, formation. You're in this class or that class. Fill out this form, this document, this legal document. You see, this is all a way to get us to line up like dominoes, so that if one falls down, they all fall down. So everyone must behave like everyone else. So it's peer pressure and creating ways that you have to be politically correct. And whether this is from the right or the left is inconsequential. They're the same. It's all about conforming, you see, with formation, with form. So this is another means by which the Demiurge goes about to prevent man from being free and tapping into their true nature, the male and the female. So you must either behave as a guy, so you're not behaving like a man, or you're not behaving like a woman. So we have all kinds of names for these people. Fairy, tomboy, fag, so forth and so on. A way to shame and degrade our true natures. And another way is to create commandments. And I'm taking this from Etymology Online, and the noun here, to command, the verb, meaning control, right or authority to order, or compel obedience. And how do we do this? Well, we say, I was ordained by God to interpret this particular scripture a certain way, that you not do these things. Because if you do these things, you're going to go to hell. And so I'm only here to help you. You see, because if someone was truly there to help you, then they would encourage your will to make a choice. And this is what God gave us from the beginning, free will. But yet a commandment deems that you have no will. You must do what we say. You are under our control, our domain. And we talked about fear. Fear is another way. Harm, distress, deception. We're supposed to fear Donald Trump. We're supposed to fear the migrants in the caravan, 7,000 people. I think it's even less than that in this latest caravan that's coming up from the border. Let's send 15,000 army troops to the border. Let's create a wall so we can have our paradise. See, this is a mechanization of the Demiurge. And it's not just about being against Donald Trump, but it's also those that are against Donald Trump, because they're part of that machine of creating fear about Donald Trump. And it's human nature to rebel, you see. So they create terror and fear. And they even called the world that we live in terror. Tyrann, Latin word for earth is terra, is what was named. And so forth and so on. You see, it's a plot against everyone living in peace, everyone living in repose, everyone living in silence, so they can really listen to, with rationale and empirically, what's going on around them, rather than irrationally through fear. And so the Lord God said in Isaiah 45:7, I form the light. So he doesn't create the light, but he forms the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. You see, he is the God who creates calamities. Now, I know that there are some that want to be apologists and say that, well, the Lord God is just creating calamity. But calamities in and of itself is meant to put injury on others. That's evil. You just have to call it what it is. And yet 3 John chapter 1 verse 11 says, Beloved, follow not that which is evil, but that which is good. He that doeth good is of God, but he that doeth evil hath not seen God. See, the Demiurge has not seen God. In fact, it is not God. It's the God of this world, but it's not the God. the true father mother. For else, why would he do evil? Ultimately, that knowledge is kept from us so that we cannot find our accomplishment, what God calls our sacred name, our unique name that is only meant for us. Each one of us has a name, and that name is unique to us. In order to prevent us from having an understanding of that name, the Demiurge prevents us from having the tool that helps us have access to that name, which is knowledge. I'm taking this from the Gospel of Truth, under the section titled, The Father Calling Those Who Have Knowledge. Those whose names he knew first were called last, so that the one who has knowledge is one whose name the Father has pronounced. For one whose name has not been spoken is in ignorance. So if you don't know your true name, and if you're distracted by everyone else and what they're up to and what they're doing or not doing and whether or not they failed or whether or not they succeeded and they got a gold medal and so forth and so on, and you're just sitting there thinking about how everyone else is failing or succeeding, sinning or not sinning, then you have no time to think about, well, what's my name? And what do I do about it? How do I find my name? Well, it begins through knowledge. So this is why the Demiurge prevents us from having access to the tree of knowledge of good and evil, to keep us ignorant. We don't know how to set forth our will, nor to form that will, the male and the female. Indeed, how shall one hear if a name has not been uttered? You see, the moment that you listen to that silence that's within you is when you'll hear God speaking to you, telling you what is your name. And the name doesn't get revealed in a moment or in a second, but it gets revealed much like a flower unfolding, quietly through time, unaware. You ever notice a flower just seems to pop up out of nowhere? You're not watching it. One night you go to sleep and there's a bud. Next morning it's fully bloomed. That's what it's like. Your name just gets revealed in silence. This is why Christ asks us to pray. This is why great philosophers and wise sages talk about meditation being so valuable. For whoever remains ignorant until the end is a creature of forgetfulness and will perish with it. And this is what John talks about when he says that if you bring forth what's within you, you'll be saved. But if you don't bring forth what's within you, it will destroy you. This part of you, it will literally destroy you because you'll be consumed with jealousy, envy, covetousness, hatred toward others. Because you're so consumed about what they're doing or not doing. Peeking through windows at your neighbor. Worried about what your aunt and uncle are doing and their children. Worried about what your parents think or don't think. Worried about whether or not Joe is gay or Susie is straight. And not thinking about yourself. For whoever remains ignorant until the end is a creature of forgetfulness and will perish with it. If this is not so, why have these wretches no name? Why have they no voice? Hence, whoever has knowledge is from above. That person ascends to him and knows how he is called. Having knowledge, that person does the will of him who called. If called, that person hears, replies, and turns toward him who called, finds rest. Those who thus are going to have knowledge know whence they came and whither they are going. They know it as someone who, having become intoxicated, has turned from this drunkenness and, having come to himself, has restored what is his own. Is that pretty powerful or what? You can read all the poetry you want, but right here lies enormously powerful truth that will transform your life just in that one paragraph. And so what is the meaning of that thing called your name? Old English, nomeon, to name, call, nominate, appoint. What has God appointed for you to be your mission? That's your name, your appointment. You ever heard that the term nominated? I'm nominating you to be president. An appointment. The shortened form of that is name. You see here it says nomia, to name, to call. That's what God means when he says, I'm calling you. He's calling you every single day, not only in your inner self, but all around you, everywhere. God is telling you exactly what your path is, but you're so worried about what everyone else is doing. I should wear a scarf. I should do this. I should do that. But you don't listen to what God's saying to you. What is your name? What is your calling? Now, a couple other things we must understand that's going to help us down that path of calling. The first being the Garden of Eden. I'm taking this from Wikipedia under the term Garden of Eden, Jewish eschatology. In the Talmud and the Jewish Kabbalah, the scholars agree that there are two types of spiritual places called Garden and Eden. The first is rather terrestrial, or abundant fertility and luxuriant vegetation, known as the lower Gan Eden. But this is the Eden where we get trapped into thinking that things of pleasure is our ultimate purpose. And so pleasure is the answer. Now, pleasure and pain are really two sides of the same coin. They're on a continuum. And, one example is the pains of having to go exercise at the gym, right? The world is made that way. You ever ask that question, why does everything that we like taste good and everything we don't like so much supposed to be good for us? Celestial, the habitation of righteous. Jewish and non-Jewish, immortal souls known as higher Gan Eden. The Rabbanim differentiate between Gan and Eden. Adam is said to have dwelt only in Gan, whereas Eden is said never to have been witnessed by any mortal eye. This is what we must understand. Christianity itself comes from Judaism, among other things, other teachings, Greek, Babylonian, Sumerian, Asia Minor. All of these formulate our mythologies, but what we have to appreciate is so much of Western culture, what's called Christianity, so much of Western Christianity or interpretation of Orthodox Christianity, believe in this Garden of Eden, but they don't even understand that the Jewish themselves believe there are two Gardens of Eden. Now, why am I pointing this out? Because we need to understand this if we're going to understand what we're going to read here in a moment in this next section, that there is a paradise that Christ talked about, and there's a paradise at which we were seated or placed into on this earth. And one is a paradise about eros and all the things that entice us, and we become amorous of. That's the messenger. And then the message itself is ultimately what is the goal, the paradise of the perfect human, that no man has gone to except Christ. And now, at least at the time that Christ walked, now there may have been many that have gone since. But also what's significant is the word cherubim. In the Jewish angelic hierarchy, and again it's a hierarchy, in Gnosticism we have no such concepts of hierarchy. We are co-equal. We only have missions and names that are all equally part of God's ultimate unfolding. In the book of Ezekiel, Christian icons, the cherub is depicted as having a number of wing pairs and their four faces, that of a lion, an ox, a human, and an eagle. So what is this thing called cherub? The ruler of the fates. Cherub is the ruler of the astrological chart, or the wheel of life. In this realm, it's called the configurations of the ages, or what's called the ages. And the fixed signs of the zodiac sign do include Taurus the ox, Leo the lion, Aquarius the man, and Scorpio, the scorpion, which is also called the eagle sometimes. So this is what's being referred to when we talk about the wheel of life and the cherubim. And in the center of the flaming sword is the sun. That's the flaming sword that is turning in all directions, meaning the sun is crossing the sky or through the horizon, named after Horus, where we also get the word hours. So this wheel of life is turning, you see, and the cherubims in all the four corners of the fixed signs is turning the sword, so that we may not have access to the knowledge of tree of good and evil and the knowledge or the tree of life, so that we are fated to this wheel, the constellations. Not every one of us have to go through each one of these signs. Some people can take on the entire wheel and have knowledge and understanding, but you must pass through that doorway called Doth, which is knowledge. In Jewish understanding of the word, Doth essentially means sacred knowledge or hidden knowledge that takes us above the seventh realm. And in order to do that, you have to open up everything you've been told about what's right and wrong, what you're not permitted to do, and so forth and so on. And Jehovah is here to tell you everything you're not permitted to do and limit you. And so you have a limited mind and therefore limited perspective, limited reality, and a limited lifespan. Now I'm taking this from the secret book of John, verse 20. But what they call the tree of knowledge of what is good and evil is the epinoia of the light. So this becomes important for us to understand. What is this thing called epinoia? This will help clarify what is this thing called the tree of knowledge of good and evil. They, the rulers, remained in front of it in order that he might not look up to his fullness and come to know the nakedness of his shamefulness. But as for me, I set them right so that they would eat. Meaning the Lord God, Christ himself, interfered in the garden, the lower garden, that is, of Eden, gone, so that man would partake. And this is when he interferes with the prime directive. That's when you become a male, because you intercept, or you interject, or you inject your will into the darkness, so that light may be had. And when it's feminine, you're a repository of that knowledge, and you offer it freely. You don't force it on to someone, but you offer it, and you glow that offering so that people become attracted to it. Now, with the masculine, you entice people through questions and scenarios, such as what happened in the Garden of Eden, in the tree, the serpent, which is a seraphim who entered the body of a serpent, which is another symbol of wisdom that is in all cultures, by the way. And it says, and I said to the Savior, Lord, was it not the snake who taught Adam so that he would eat? And Christ laughed and said, the snake taught them to eat from a wicked desire to sow which belongs to destruction, in order that Adam would become useful to it, and knew that he was disobedient to it because the light of epinoia dwelt in him, making him more correct in his thinking than the chief ruler. What is he saying here? He's saying that he did this so they may be enlightened and see things that even the chief ruler himself could not see. Remember when I told you that the word wicked comes from the same root word we get the word wisdom. And desire comes from that same word we get the word star, of the stars. And so this is essentially telling you the wisdom of the universe, the cosmos, so that we may eat of that knowledge. It's beyond this earth. that paradise, the four walls. We're trapped into the walls, and any premeditation of division and creating walls, that's of the Demiurge, you see, to separate people. Separate understanding and knowledge and interchange. Keep each people into a small bubble as much as possible. People into small little islands so they don't have interchange and learn from each other. So we don't learn the universal language because then from the Tower of Babel we're just speaking Babel to each other because we can't understand each other. And so Christ says, no, knowledge is a good thing, and here I'm offering it to you. And so he interjects through the light of epinoia that dwelt in him. And so what is this thing called epinoia then? And there's a great website here. I believe it's gnosis.q. I may be incorrect, but I'll leave the link below. So this gives you a lot of definitions of different words used in the Gnostic text. Epinoia, afterthought. Epinoia is the Father's afterthought. So in other words, what is the will and what is foreknowledge? Epinoia is essentially foreknowledge, the awakener. Epinoia, the awakener to rectify the anomaly or error in thinking of the generation of Yod-Baoth. Epinoia appears in the story of Adam and Eve as the awakener to help Adam remember his true origins in the upper echelons. His true origin is the son and daughter of God, and perfect from the beginning. He must will toward that perfection, not will to find out that he's not perfect, but will to understand he is perfect. And he, the Spirit, sent a helper to Adam, luminous epinoia, which comes out of him, who is called life. And she assists the whole creature, but toiling with him, and by restoring him to his fullness, and by teaching him about the descent of his seed, and by teaching him about the way of ascent, which is the way he came down. And the luminous epinoia was hidden in Adam, in order that the Archons might not know her. So what is this thing called epinoia? Well, I'll give you a word that's very similar, and that'll help you understand that word, epiphany. You're not going to have those moments if you're distracted by everything on the outside, if you're constantly looking at everything else that's going on around you, and you're so concerned, and you're envious, and you're jealous, and you're angry, all the demons that want to possess you and take you over, so that you are drunken, in a state of drunkenness. You have no awareness, so that you have no awareness of not only the external world, but also the internal self. Epinoia is there to help spark the gnosis in you. Epinoia is constantly providing you correspondences everywhere within you and outside of you, symbolisms, analogies, fables. Remember in the last video I talked about the way in which God speaks to us? God doesn't speak to us as though I'm speaking to you right now, literally. God speaks to you in parables, allegories, fables, symbolisms. Why does God do this? Why doesn't God just come out and say it to me? Well, because if God did that, then God would be speaking in a very limited form and way. God speaks in a way that when he speaks to all. And so every one of us, depending on our point of reference, will understand that fable or that allegory, that symbolism, that parable in our own way. It will be truth to us, and that truth will have been true to us, and it will be truth, because it's the very thing that will set us free. But what sets me free is not necessarily what's going to set you free. This is why God speaks through epinoia, in the silent spaces, through light, guiding you. Yod-Baoth then separated the androgynous Adam into Adam and Eve by modeling in Eve after the image of epinoia hiding in him. And see, separating the male and the female, the right side and left side of the brain, so that you cannot have a full picture. And so this world that we're living in is constantly telling you you're supposed to act like a man. You're supposed to act like a woman. Behave like this. So they're conforming you. Remember earlier we were talking about commandments and conformity and authority. This is the way the Demiurge does it. And through shame and guilt, jealousy, covetousness, these are the tools and mechanizations of the Demiurge that wants to keep you in ignorance and darkness. Then the epinoia, the light, hid herself in Adam. And so that Eve part of you in the him, which is all of us, we are spiritual beings projecting our will. That's what it means by him or masculine. And the way we form it is within us. The answer is in you already as to how to form it. And the chief Archon wanted to bring her out of Adam. He made another creature in the form of a woman, according to the likeness of the epinoia. And this is why man has intercourse with a woman, and then he ejaculates seed, because in that was a formulation of the Demiurge to try to get that light out of man. And it does have some type of ultimate success in that it forms other flesh humans. So it does bring forth creation. And so the Demiurge and his minions go about and study that. And this is why some have nightmares about aliens coming and taking them and dissecting them and trying to study them and impregnate them, and they're trying to understand this process. Why does this work? They don't understand how man has the creative force, and yet they've been around far longer than man, but they don't have that force. Why is it? Again, don't get mixed up with the messenger and the message, because it's not consequential. It's not important. And you're not going to know until it gets revealed, whether they're aliens or they're demons and angels, spiritual. You see, none of that ultimately matters. What matters is understanding this process is the way it is, and take from it wisdom so that you may be able to manifest your name and your accomplishment. That's all you need to take from it. Not fear, not concern about what is or isn't. Now be aware, so you be wise as a serpent and gentle, a dove. And he brought the part which he had taken from the power of man into the female creature. And when Adam saw Eve, the epinoia in her woke him from his forgetfulness. And he, Adam, saw the woman beside him, and in that moment the luminous epinoia appeared, and she lifted the veil which lay over his mind, and he became sober from the drunkenness of darkness. And this is the way it happens. That's why the female must become as a male. In other words, she must be free to manifest her will, inject her will into all of existence. And thus, when she becomes as a male, as Christ says in the Gospel according to Thomas, that will be when we find paradise. And also the same with the man. When he's able to find the epinoia within, that's also when he will be free. And man will no longer subjugate the woman, because man now is no longer subjugating himself to the law. As Paul himself suggests we do, release ourselves from the law, being subjugated to the law, and thereby release the woman. And by releasing the woman, we will have access to the repository of all knowledge and truth, because that woman, the original soul woman, was the instructor, as pointed out on the origins of the world. Now, with that backdrop, and I know that's a lot of knowledge, we're going to better understand the next two sections we're going to read. And so, as I said before, a day in God's experience is not just 24 hours. It can be thousands of years or even more. It is an aeon. It is an emanation, a completion of a work. That is a day for God. And this is where we left off in the last section. The first atom of light is spiritual and appeared on the first day. The second atom is a person with soul and appeared on the sixth day, called Aphrodite. The third atom is earthly, that is, a man of laws, who appeared on the eighth day, after the rest of poverty, which is called Sunday. Now the progeny of the earthly atom multiplied and was completed, and produced within itself all the technical skill of the atom of soul, but all were in ignorance. And this is the way it worked. Now, how long this went on, I do not know. Neither the Gnostic text nor the Bible tell us how long these different emanations lasted. Some people talk about Atlantis. Some people talk about people living on Mars. There were three different kinds of human, and we're living in a third type of human called the earthly human. But within all of us reside three types. We merely need to cultivate them and bring them forth. We talked about them: the hylic, which is the flesh being; the soul-oriented being, which is known as the psychic; and then finally the pneumatic, which is spiritual being. And this is where Christ intervenes, or Sophia intervenes. Both of them intervene in the Garden of Eden to bring forth an interjection, which is the masculine, which is a him, into the Garden of Eden through the serpent, a seraphim. The trees of paradise and the beast. Next let me continue. When the ruler saw him and the woman who was with him err in ignorance like beasts, they rejoiced greatly. This before they had access to the tree of knowledge of good and evil. They were basically in ignorance, and the Demiurge and the minions were happy for this, because they were no longer threatened. When they learned that an immortal human was not going to pass them by, in other words, when Christ and Sophia were not simply going to just let this go, but that they would even have to fear the woman who had turned into a tree, they were troubled, and said, "Is this perhaps the true human, who blinded us and taught us about this defiled woman who is like him, that we might be conquered?" Remember when Adam said that, when they asked, "Who are you?" he said, "I'm a human, and I'm coming here to destroy your work." He said, well, remember when we saw that woman, Eve? Could it be that maybe that actually was Sophia? So they were getting concerned. They were all speculating, like, who is this? What's going on here? So they got scared. Then the seven took counsel. They came to Adam and Eve timidly, meaning cowardice, and they said to him, "The fruit of every tree created for you in paradise may be eaten, but beware, don't eat from the tree of knowledge. If you do eat, you will die." After they gave them a great fright, they withdrew up to their authorities. So they came down to deposit seeds of fear, because they had fear within them, and so they ejected that fear, so that they may deposit that fear into Adam and Eve, the flesh human, because they didn't want them to have the knowledge of their origins and their power, because by doing this they would have power over them, because ultimately what they were afraid of is that very knowledge. They were afraid of these two trees, the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. And so this is very typical of humans, is that they will deposit into others what they themselves hold within them. Then came the one who is wiser than all creatures, who was called the beast. When he saw the likeness of their mother Eve, he said to her, "What is it that God said to you?" And she said, "Don't eat from the tree of knowledge." He said, "Not only don't eat from it, but also don't touch it, lest you die." Now, we don't know if Eve here is making something up, because nothing prior from the authorities had said to not touch of it. Now, it certainly said not to eat of it, but this is just something I noticed. He said to her, "Don't be afraid." Now, you see, this is the opposite of what the Demiurge is offering Adam and Eve. Sophia and Christ is offering to be at peace. Don't be afraid. You certainly shall not die. For he knows that when you eat from it, your mind will be sobered, and you will become like gods, knowing the difference between evil and good. Now remember in Genesis chapter 3, they were kicked out of the garden. The reasoning was because they had become like us, knowing the difference between good and evil. Now here, who was telling the truth? Well, of course, it was the serpent. And not only that, but in addition to that God said that the day you eat of that tree, you will die. Well, on that day that she ate of the tree, well, she didn't die, so that was a lie. That didn't come to pass. And we're talking about the Demiurge here. We're not talking about God. For he said this to you because he is jealous. And remember, we learned earlier, what is Jehovah's name? He says, "My name is jealousy," so that you would not eat from it. Now, Eve believed the words of the instructor. She looked at the tree and saw that it was beautiful and appealing, and she desired it. She took some of its fruit and ate, and she gave it to her husband also, and he ate too. Then their minds opened. For when they ate, the light of knowledge shone for them. This makes sense, does it not? Why else call it a tree of knowledge? When they put on shame, they knew that they were naked with regard to knowledge. Now, they weren't shameful because they took on knowledge. They were shameful because they understood they didn't have that knowledge. They were deprived of it, and they were vulnerable. This is what the word naked means, vulnerable. When they sobered up, they saw that they were naked, and they became enamored of one another. When they saw that their makers had beastly forms, they loathed them. They understood a great deal. What did we learn earlier about the word form? They had beastly intentions to rule over and to make people conform to their laws. Here, fill out this form. Have you eaten from the tree? Then when the rulers knew that Adam and Eve had transgressed their commandment, they entered paradise and came to Adam and Eve in an earthquake and a great threat to see the result of the help that was given. Then Adam and Eve were very much disturbed and hid under the trees in paradise. The rulers did not know where they were. And so notice that this Jehovah God is not omniscient, doesn't know everything. And yet God is supposed to know everything, and yet didn't even know where Adam was. The rulers did not know where they were and said, "Adam, where are you?" He said, "I'm here, but because of fear of you." You see, this is the tactic that the Demiurge uses. He uses fear. Divide and conquer. Be afraid of that group over there. Be afraid of white people. Be afraid of black people. Be afraid of Mexicans. Be afraid of gay people. Be afraid of straight people. Be afraid of this. Be afraid. Afraid. That is the workings of the Demiurge. But because of fear of you, I hid after I became ashamed. Remember what I said. Some of the other tools are fear and shame. But they said to him in ignorance. Again, they're ignorant. Who is the one who spoke to you of the shame that you put on, unless you ate from the tree? And you see, this is because they were ashamed that they let themselves fall prey to ignorance. And he said, "The woman who you gave me, she is the one who gave to me, and I ate." Now, you have to take this from Adam's perspective. He just woke up out of a stupor, and it looks to him as though Jehovah had created a woman for him. Now, we know differently from earlier Gnostic texts that it was Sophia that formulated the soul Eve and the flesh Eve. But, of course, Adam was put into stupor and didn't realize this. But from his perspective, this new being offered him from this knowledge, this tree. This is all he knows. Then they said to the woman, "What is this you have done?" See the way that they're using shame and guilt? "What have you done?" She answered and said, "The instructor is the one who incited me, and I ate." Then the rulers came to the instructor. Their eyes were blinded by him, so that they were not able to do anything to him. And notice when you read Gnostic texts, it seems to go back and forth, and even in the Bible, between a male and a female. Because as I said, male and female are not determined by genitalia. They're determined by what is the expression. Is it to will something or to form something? If it's to will something, it's masculine, and if it's to form something, it's feminine, or to be a vessel of that will. They merely cursed him, since they were powerless. So they cursed the serpent. Afterward, they came to the woman, and they cursed her and her offspring. And her offspring ultimately were of the Jewish lineage, and they were cursed because they were blinded. And how were they blinded? They were blinded by laws. And we'll learn this later And you can already know this if you read Genesis and so forth and so on. You'll see how he came and he brought the 10 Commandments and Levitical law and so forth and so on. So he blinds them. This is what it means to curse. After the woman, they had cursed Adam and the earth and the fruit because of him. And everything that they created, they cursed. There is no blessing from them. Good cannot come from evil. And remember the verses I was reading earlier where it talked about he's the God of both good and evil? And then later on we learned that it said in the New Testament that the true Father that Christ presented is only good and there's no evil in him. Since that day, the authorities knew that truly there was something stronger than they would not have known except that their commandment was broken. Now that is the very reason why we came here. We came here to redeem the Demiurge and his authorities. They brought a great envy into the world only because of the immortal human. And remember, envy is the creation of enmity because of what we covet. So they coveted humankind because humankind was immortal and had the power of God within. Now, when the rulers saw that their Adam had acquired a different knowledge, they wanted to test him. Remember what I talked about? The ability to name things is what gives you power. They gathered all the domestic animals and wild beasts of the earth and the birds of heaven and brought them to Adam to see what he would call them. So what is he going to name them? Does he have that ability to recognize what they should be called? That awareness? Do you know what you should be called? What is your name? When he saw them, he gave names to their creatures. They were troubled because Adam had sobered up from all ignorance. So they gathered together and took counsel and said, "Look, Adam has become like one of us, so that he understands the difference between light and darkness. Now perhaps he will be deceived, as with the tree of knowledge, and will come to the tree of life, and eat from it, and become immortal, and rule, and condemn us, and regard us and all our glory as folly. And then he will pass judgment on us and the world." So they were afraid that they were going to lose their authority, that man would rule himself, that he'd be his own moral agent, that he'd be free. He would be able to live freely. Come, let us cast him out of paradise, down to the earth. At this point, once Adam and Eve partook of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you must understand at that point, they ascended to the real Garden of Eden, where the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life are in the midst. And so they saw this, that they were ascending, or they had ascended. And so what did they do? They took them and cast them back down to the paradise on earth, known as Gone, the place from where he was taken, you see. They ascended to a new garden once they partake of that tree. You see, knowledge is what transforms everything around us, because everybody has this idea that we are a result of the physical world, when in reality, the physical world is a result of what we project from our minds. And so the moment that their minds opened up, everything around them transformed into the real paradise. And they saw the world for what it was, the truth, instead of what was called reality. And the ruler saw this, and so they fashioned a way to cast him back down into this prison called earth, the place from whence he was taken, so that he will no longer be able to know anything better than we can. And so they cast Adam and his wife out of paradise. In other words, they cursed him by not be able to tap into this knowledge, tree of good and evil within, and the tree of life. So they would be distracted by everything on the outside. And you'll know this because later it talks about how man begins to toil, and he'd be in more pain, and he'll be distracted by the things and cares of this world. And that's exactly what happens. And what they have done did not satisfy them. Rather, they were still afraid. They came to the tree of life, and they set great terrors around it, fiery living beings called cherubim. We talked about this before. So they fated man to the constellations, and they left a flaming sword in the midst, that's the sun, turning continually with great terror, so that no one from among earthly beings might ever enter that place. Are you listening to that? Literally telling us that we were imprisoned on this planet. After these things, when the rulers had become jealous of Adam, they wanted to diminish the human lifetimes, but they were unable because of fate, which was established since the beginning. So once they created these constellations, the constellations themselves obeyed its own laws, and those laws said that mankind will live 1,000 years on average. For the lifetime was determined for each of the people 1,000 years according to the circuit of the luminaries. But although the rulers were not able to do this, each of the evildoers took away 10 years. And they do this through 7 expressions. There are 7 rulerships, and demons use different means through fear and anger, so forth and so on. And they've actually succeeded in reducing human life to less than 100 years now. So all the remaining time amounts to 930 years, and these are spent in grief and weakness and in evil distractions. Thus life has gone from that day until the consummation of the age. Consuming of the age, meaning once we consume the constellations. Once you understand in full, or take in the fullness of the understanding and knowledge of the ages, then you'll be set free. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again soon. Bye.